Welcome to Prehistoric Whispers. In this video we will guide you through the Cretaceous crime scene. Not monsters, exactly, just nature with all the safety features removed. Before we dive in, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or the country below so we can map the global expedition into deep time. And remember, psychopath is our spicy metaphor. Dinosaurs weren't evil, they were efficient, which frankly is scarier. Picture a skull the size of a compact car, all windows and weaponry, an architecture of violence. The first thing you notice is the seal, if you can call it that. Rows of thick banana-shaped teeth, not knives but chisels, rounded in cross-section so they don't snap when they hit bone. Each tooth is a serrated railroad spike set into a jaw built like a bridge, reinforced with interlocking struts and fused sutures that say, "Go ahead, hit harder." This isn't the delicate slice-and-run toolkit of a graceful killer. This is the bite of a compactor that happens to walk. You don't feel the footsteps first. You feel the air change, a pressure you can't name like the world holding its breath. Then a scent. Ammonia and copper and heat, because a nose wired straight into the ancient part of the brain has been sampling you for minutes. Tyrannosaurus didn't need to see you to know what you had for breakfast. Its olfactory bulbs were swollen with purpose. It read the landscape in smells the way we read headlines, catching every rumour of rot, sweat, panic, and opportunity. Eyes forward too, big front-facing, without the kind of binocular overlap that lets you put a bite precisely where you want it. Think less lizard with a brain stem, and more avian sniper with a data plan. When the head tilts, the teeth catch the light and you realise they're not polished daggers. They're textured with microscopic serrations, denticles, each one a tiny crowbar at the edge of a larger crowbar. They don't simply cut, they puncture, wedge, and lever, turning resistant material into a problem solved by physics. Paleontologists call the feeding style puncture and pull. You could call it goodbye femur. We know this because bones from hadrosaurs and ceratopsians show deep oval tooth pits, the kind you get when an animal bites through cortex into marrow and then drags the skull full of war out again. The track marks don't lie. Neither do the coprolites, fossilized feces, packed with pulverized bone splinters, proof that this throat was a mortar, and this gut a blender that didn't object to a little calcium. Close up, the skull is a lesson in brutal engineering. The nasal bones, the bridge down the snout, are thickened and fused, a natural I-beam. The joints between skull bones are locked the way a carpenter squares a frame. Open wide and you can watch the hinge roll, not delicate like a cat's, but deep and buttressed, working with a neck built like a winch. Most predators negotiate with prey. This one negotiates with leverage. Bite force estimates vary because scientists are careful, but whatever number you prefer, it ends with enough to turn bone into gravel. The bite wasn't a test. It was the point. It's fashionable to make fun of the arms, two-fingered, tucked in like a bad design note. But pick one up in your imagination and feel the contradiction. Short, yes, but thick with muscle, tendon like steel cable. Claws curved like meat hooks. Not for hugging, not for typing, probably for bracing, gouging, stabilizing at the moment of impact. A hand that says hold still in a language you can't survive. And they didn't need to be long. The business wasn't up front in a tyrannosaur. The business was the 100 kilograms of skull and all the unpleasant ideas contained therein. Now, shift the camera to the rest of the body. The tail doesn't just trail, it's a counterweight, a balancing act that turns a two-story head into a steady platform. Legs long, muscles wrapped around the thighs like braided cable. Top speed debates are academic. No one on the menu is timing it with a radar gun. But this was a mover, not a plodder. The feet are sledgehammers with toenails, broad enough to spread the force and mean enough to crush anything unlucky beneath them. If you were hoping for finesse, that was extinct before it started. Behaviour leaves scars. Look at tyrannosaur skulls with healed bite marks. Yes, healed. Face biting wasn't a death sentence, it was a memo. Rivalries, courtship, settling arguments about territory or status with dental signatures carved into cheekbones. If you're wondering why you'd put your face near another face full of railroad spikes, the answer is because you're built to survive it. You can almost hear it. The wet thump of two giants colliding. The rasp of teeth on bone. The low thunder of a bellow that isn't for you but still empties your lungs. Predator or scavenger? The only meaningful answer is yes. A carcass is calories already organised. A living animal is a carcass on layaway. Embedded tyrannosaur teeth in healed prey bones show attacks that didn't finish the job. Bite marks on ceratopsian frills and hadrosaur tails, some healed, some catastrophic, sketch a long campaign of attempts, counters and do-overs. Opportunism is not laziness. It's competence with fewer steps. If the wind delivered the smell of fresh death, it followed. If the wind delivered the smell of weakness, it created the death personally. The kill itself is mechanical and ugly, because elegance is for animals that can't afford mistakes. Imagine a triceratops breaking through scrib, neck shield forward, horns levelled, a living bulldozer with points. Tyrannosaurus doesn't go for the showy cinematic flank hamstring if it has a better option. It targets the neck, the pelvis, the thorax, anchors and bottlenecks. A crushing bite to the neck can sever vessels and destabilise the spine. A bite to the hip shatters the engine room that moves the back half. The moment the prey drops, the rules change. Soft tissue first, big mouthfuls leverage with the neck. Teeth are replaced through life, just in case, like a set of self-sharpening tools you never have to return. Night or day didn't matter, but imagine dusk because it's worse. The light breaks into ribbons between conifers. Insects drone. The lowland river moves like a dark conveyor. You're downwind from something tall enough to see across the fern sea, and patient enough to wait for you to stop thinking. Tyrannosaurus doesn't rush the audition. It watches. Depth perception matters when your business model is precision trauma. Every so often, museum fossils show you the aftermath. A tyrannosaur coprolite, think boulder with opinions, glitters with bone shards. A triceratops frill displays a row of pits the size of golf balls that match T-Rex, dentition like keys to locks. A hadrosaur tail shows a raked pattern of tooth marks, healed into grotesque topography, the record of an earlier day when death had an appointment but traffic intervened. These aren't stories told by poets. They're affidavits signed in calcium. There's a temptation to call it a monster and be done. Monsters belong to fairy tales, though, and this belongs to physics. The skull is heavy because force needs mass. The teeth are thick because bending mahayants snap thin come blades. The neck is massive because a lever arm that long demands a counter. You could draw it on a napkin. Requirements, constraints, solutions. Evolution is the engineer that never sleeps, and T-Rex is one of its cleanest blueprints for turning distance into damage. Look again at the mouth. Between the teeth, gums hug the crowns high, thick and vascular, protecting the bases like padded gaskets. Saliva strings between the jaws, lubrication for swallowing things that weren't designed to be swallowed. When the head drops over a rib cage, the body weight joins the bite. Bones creak. The thorax compresses. Air leaves the world in a rectangle of breath that will not be replaced. If you're expecting ceremony, there isn't any. Only steps that follow other steps because they work. Juveniles, for their part, run a different business. Long-legged, more blade-toothed, they slice and chase and keep the ecosystem honest. A relay team that hands prey off to the mass of adulthood. Each growth stage a new job, a new niche, a new invoice to the local fauna. By the time full size arrives, the skull has thickened, the teeth have swollen, and the strategy is condensed into a thesis short enough to fit on a tooth. Puncture, crush, pull, repeat. You might want to know how you'd fare, not well. The best you could hope for is to be misclassified as uninteresting. Don't bleed, don't limp, don't be loud, do not enter the floodplain at dusk, do not mistake silence for safety. Big animals move quietly when everything that makes noise has already run. If you ever see the head tilt, the eyes lock, the tail stiffen, congratulations, you're in the math now. One last detail, because it's the one that lingers. Healed tyrannosaur bones show fractures mended, infection survived, lives lived with the kind of damage that would retire a lesser predator. This isn't just a killer, it's a survivor of its own choices. That skull with its constellation of scars and pits is a scrapbook. Every mark a conversation, every repair a receipt. It didn't need malice to be terrifying. It needed geometry, leverage, patience, and hunger. Nature's original 4 horsemen, all delivered at once through the grin of a bone crusher. Start with a dry river and the smell of patience. Madagascar, Late Cretaceous. A heat-hammered floodplain where the water doesn't so much flow as remember how. The ground is a mosaic of hoof-scuffed mud and sun-shattered clay, and every track is a rumour with a timestamp. In the middle of this, a shadow with a bulldog skull and a scarred forehead stops, head low, nostrils working. You can see the problem already. Nothing's moving, but everything is edible if you don't cling to sentimental rules like we don't eat our own. Majungasaurus didn't. The jawline says so. Deep, thick, reinforced, as if the designer got paid by the square inch of bone. The teeth aren't tyrannosaur-sized railroad spikes. They're stout, laterally compressed blades with crenulated edges, little wavelets of serration that grab and rip. When that mouth meets a carcass, it writes a signature. Oval punctures where the crown seats into bone, paired scrape marks where the denticles drag, spacing that matches the rhythm of an abelisaur bite, like handwriting experts match loops and slants. Sometimes the bone is, awkwardly, the bone of another Majungasaurus. And before you imagine some ritualistic taboo breaking, let's get the tone right. Taboo is a luxury for animals with full bellies and social contracts. Out here, a dead conspecific is calories wearing your face. Picture the crime scene. A long low pile that used to be a predator. Skin going to parchment in the sun. Tendons like guitar strings. Around the edges, smaller players have already set their table. Crocodiles with the patience of saints. Mammals with the courage of thieves. Birds with opinions. Then the big head arrives and the air changes temperature. The crocs slide back into the channel with a sound like wet fabric. The mammals make that guilty hush scurry. And the birds, well, they're never embarrassed. They just shuffle over a little and practice dignified waiting while the main act clocks in. First bite isn't sentimental either. No ceremonial last respects, no sorry cousin. It's mechanical. The jaw fits over a limb and you can almost hear the plan. Puncture, twist, lever. A sound like a green branch breaking, only wetter. The head yanks, the neck supplies the winch, the ground says fine. Take your share. The marks left behind, the deep pits, the crescent scrapes, the serration chatter, a Majungasaurus doing exactly what it did to titanosaurs like Raptosaurus when luck smiled wider. The difference this time is the shape of the skull attached to the meal. Why cannibalize? Because scarcity is a pressure cooker, and meat doesn't care who grew it. Because a carcass you already understand, the anatomy, the weak points, the best entry angles, is just good business. Because competition bleeds, and when you settle disputes by face-biting and head-butting, sometimes the loser is dinner by default. Pick any reason that isn't morality. They're all better reasons out here. And yes, face-biting. You don't evolve a skull like a sledge if you never slam it into anything. Majungasaurus wore that bony head ornament like a caution sign, not a lance for jousting, more a bumper for grim arguments. Look at the fossil skulls. Pitted, remodelled, healing gone slightly lumpy where a rival's teeth left memos on the cheekbones. You don't leave a scar like that on an animal built for politeness. You leave it on something that steps forward when challenged, because stepping back just delays the inevitable. Now, widen the lens to the neighbourhood. The Meverano Formation, sandstones and mudstones stacked like chapters, keeps receipts. Bones of sauropods with tooth marks that match the local bully. Bones of crocs with different kinds of crushing damage. And bones of Majungasaurus with those same familiar scrapes, pits and yank marks in all the places you'd expect if the dino was both thorough and indifferent. Pelvis, ribs, long bones where the marrow lives. No exaggerated story required. No need to invent night raids and serial killer monologues. The Rock says, died then fed upon. The Rock does not blush. Lest you think Madagascar cornered the market on self-service entrees, the northern continents filed similar paperwork. Up in what would become Montana and Alberta, tyrannosaurids wrote their own cookbook margins. Bite marks on tyrannosaur bones that line up with other tyrannosaur teeth. Sometimes healed, attacks that didn't finish the job, sometimes not. If the question is which species were above cannibalism, the answer is ones that never had to choose between it and starving. Spoiler, not many. And then there's the case of how science corrects itself, which is its own flavour of horror comedy. For decades, a ghost story haunted the Triassic. Tiny theropods accused of cannibalism based on a bone jumble at Ghost Ranch. Turns out a lot of those baby coelophysids were crocodile cousins misfiled under scandal. We love a salacious headline. Nature prefers the footnote. But when the data really do line up, as with Abelis or bite signatures on Abilis or bones, the footnote is the headline and it reads, calmly, they ate each other when it made sense. Back to the floodplain where sense is written in heat shimmer. Imagine the moment that makes cannibalism switch from theory to practice. Two giants meet at the water's edge, both thirsty, both reading the mud for news. A hissed bellow, head low, neck thickening, shoulders braced. They sidestep, test angles. The first lunge is less about teeth than about space, claiming it, denying it, turning an open path into a closed gate. A shove, a counter, a hammering clash that shakes dragonflies off reeds. Then teeth finally, raking down a flank. A wrenching head toss that spins meat from bone the way a butcher uses a hook. If one stumbles badly enough, ankle deep in the mud, a tendon yelping, the calculus tilts. Today's rival is tomorrow's resource. Dignity is not a survival strategy. Efficient is. The anatomy cooperates with the ethics of convenience. Ablosaurid forelimbs are comically reduced, but the core machinery, jaw, neck, torso, was a demolition triad. The skull bones are knitted tight, the palate reinforced, the muscle scars thick as rope. Open wide, bite down, and the cranial sled doesn't flex much. It doesn't need finesse when it has alignment. The teeth, those crenellated edges, do their small stubborn work. Where a tyrannosaur turns bone to gravel, Majungasaurus peels muscle and scores cortical bone into a notched ledger. You could match tooth spacing from a jaw to pits on a femur the way a locksmith matches a key. People have. It's not art criticism, it's fingerprinting. There's an insinuation we keep wanting to make, that eating your own kind is some psychological kink, a break in the animal code. That's an opinion forged by species that invented refrigerator etiquette. Out here, the rules are thermodynamics and a costume of teeth. A kilogram of meat is a kilogram of meat. If it comes with awkward questions attached, the scavengers do not submit them in triplicate. Even social predators, wolves, hyenas, will turn packmates into nutrient recapture under stress. Why should a solitary or loosely social Cretaceous bruiser pretend to be above it? Watch the feeding in your head, because it's both grotesque and ordinary. The carcass rolls a little as wedges of flesh come free. Flies rise, complain, settle again. A croc's eyes blink from the canal, gauges rising and falling. The big head chooses leverage over nibbling always, clamping at the pelvis, using the socket as a handle, bracing with hips, ratcheting the neck, twisting, fibres part like wet rope. A loop of guts slicks out and the birds lose their composure for a moment before remembering patience is profitable. The air is busy with iron and heat, and your stomach wants to have an opinion, but your brain says this is how ecosystems keep their books balanced. Even the teeth have their own short story. They break, they fall out, they get replaced. Little serrated knives on a conveyor belt, because the cost of doing business includes biting bone more often than a dainty gourmet would. You find shed teeth around sites like these, like drop tools at a workshop. Some are worn flat at the tip from a lifetime of bad manners with hard materials. Some are fresh, edges crisp, denticles sharp enough to snag your imagination. If you're looking for pathos, you'll find it anyway. Healed tooth marks on Majungasaurus bones whisper of animals that survived fights, limped through dry spells, kept going with a face full of punctuation. Infections leave rough textures. The body's plaster patches over deeper damage. It's not heroism, it's persistence. The same persistence that makes an animal take the most direct path from hunger to fullness, even when that path runs through a mirror. The best part, if you can call it that, is how honest the bones are about all of this. They don't editorialise. A pelvis with bite pits isn't shocked it was eaten. A rib with furrows isn't clutching pearls about who put them there. The rock remembers the heat, the drought, the flood that afterward rolled everything into a bend in the river, buried it under silt, locked the ledger and set the wax. Millions of years later, we crack it open like auditors and find line items labelled theropod on theropod, signed in serrations. That's the whole mood of this corner of the Cretaceous. No sermons, just systems. Competition writes checks, hunger cashes them, scarcity charges interest, and when the dust finally lifts, the marks on the bones tell you exactly who ate, and sometimes, awkwardly, who got eaten by someone who once looked back at them with the same eyes in a different skull. The grass doesn't whisper here. There is no grass. It's ferns and cicadas and low, glossy shrubs that hide the calculus of fear. Something slips through them. Not one because silence is romantic, but quiet in the way of a practiced thief. You think raptor, and your brain supplies a Hollywood silhouette. Door handle intelligence, choreography, a quip before the kill. What steps out is worse. A wolf-length, bird-built delinquent with a switchblade for a toe, and the nervous energy of a creature that burns calories like gossip burns through a village. The eye is forward-facing and cold. The mouth says serrated. The feathers, yes, feathers, ruffle in the damp breeze. Not peacock flamboyance, but the working warmth of an athlete's jacket. Start with the foot, because the foot is the manifesto. One toe rides high, hyperextended like a cocked trigger. The claw is not a dainty talon. It's a curved, laterally compressed blade with a sharp inner margin, built to take pressure and make statements. It does not prance around slitting bellies open like a fencer. It hooks. It bites into muscle and tendon, anchors, and converts the rest of the animal, skull, neck, torso, tail, into a winch. Raptors are machines for turning "I got a grip" into "you have a problem." And now, watch the tail. It looks like a rigid banner, and that's not an illusion. Stiffened by elongate neural spines, interlocking joints, and in many species ossified rods. The tail is a living tightrope pole. The moment the claw finds purchase, the tail flicks to counter the torque, and the whole animal can pivot mid-lunge in a way that makes your ankle hurt in sympathy. That agility isn't theatre, it's weapon retention. Keeping the grapple while the target thrashes is the difference between eating and being a weird fossil we puzzle over later. Move up to the hands and wrists. There's a crescent-shaped wrist bone, the semi-lunate carpal, that lets the hand fold inward like a pocket knife, the same architecture birds use to tuck their wings. Those long forelimbs, feathered and strong, aren't for applause, they're for mantling. Pin the prey, press it down, spread your proto-wings to stay balanced as it bucks, and let the head do what a head with a mouthful of serrated teeth does best. Picture an eagle on a hare. Now remove the sky and replace the hare with something that weighs as much as you do, and sometimes much more. Teeth next, not the railroad spikes of a bone-crushing titan, but recurved, serrated, steak knife teeth that peel and saw and worry. They are for soft parts, for edges, for carving rents you can widen with a kick and a pull. The jaws don't need to snap femurs. The business model is make holes, make panic, make blood. Panic does half the work for any predator that understands leverage. You're thinking about the pack, because the Tenontosaurus bone beds made their rounds in pop science. Multiple Deinonychus individuals tangled with the same bulky plant eater in death. A massacre turned mausoleum. Was it cooperation? Maybe, maybe not. The bones don't film things, they keep minutes. They show a tradition of showing up where the meat is, and sometimes that meat fought back. The safe bet is a spectrum, a lone operator when the quarry is rabbit-sized, a badly coordinated mob when the entree is cow-sized, with teamwork defined as, we are all very motivated in the same place. Wolves practice choreography. These felt more like a scrimmage where nobody calls the plays and everyone still gets hurt. If you need an audition tape for chaotic appetite, step into Cedar Mountain time and entertain the rumour of giants. Utahraptor, heavier, thicker, built like someone enlarged a raptor until the equation started complaining. The claws scale up, the forelimbs thicken, the skull earns its shadows. Imagine one of these planted on an iguanodon's flank, claw sunk deep, feathers flaring as momentum carries predator and prey into a mess of brush and dust. The soundtrack is hoarse breathing, vegetation breaking, the oof of impact amplifying into a bellow that makes the smaller hunters a valley away lift their heads. What makes them properly unnerving isn't just hardware, it's the bird in them. The way the head tilts with abstracted concentration, the diagnostic look of a thing that lives on signals and angles. Bone histology hints at fast growth and high metabolism. They ran hot. Feathers were there not because fashion demanded it, but because a furnace needs insulation. There are even specimens of cousins with quill knobs on the ulna, attachment points for robust wing feathers, proof that the forelimbs wore serious plumage even when flight was a rumour their lineage had left behind. If you're picturing big scaly lizards, adjust the image. You're being sized up by a murder bird that never learned to be polite. Here's how the ambush reads in the dirt. The fern bed explodes, not warning impact. One foot lands, the other stays cocked. The head strikes, teeth rake rather than clamp, while the raised toe drives down, seeking the anatomy any butcher knows by feel. Tendon anchor, muscle belly, joint gap. The claw sets like a piton. The forelimbs come in, elbows bent, feathers spread, and the body weight drops onto the thing now labelled platform. There is no elegant jump and gut flourish. There is pressure, leverage, frantic kicking violence. The prey bucks, tries to talk out of the trap. The tail corrects. The raptor bunny kicks with the free foot, opens a second problem. Blood makes traction worse for the losing party and better for the one with keratin hooks. If there are 2 or 3 more of these animals in the brush, they don't take turns. They orbit, darting in to deliver their own nasty little equations, darting out before the tail or hoof writes them into the ground. All of this comes stitched to a brain that wasn't stupid. It wasn't composing sonnets, but the inner ear was tuned for motion, the eyes for depth, the head for tracking. The hands, They could oppose in a way reptiles can't, 2 fingers and a thumb-ish digit working together. More clamp than grasp, but enough to say you're staying. That semi-lunate carpal means it couldn't pronate like a human palm down, sorry. No doorknobs, but it could snap closed fast. And in a fight, fast outranks fancy. Scale is the part the movies inflated and deflated at random. Velociraptor was lean and low, not a basketball player boogeyman. Deinonychus was closer to wolf with knives, not motorcycle with opinions. Utahraptor pushed into, you don't want to meet it with a stick, and the claw grew into something that makes adults whistle softly in museums. But size is the least frightening note. The fear is in the specialization. Each joint a paragraph on how to stay attached to thrashing meat. Each tooth a footnote on how to widen a wound without breaking your face. And the feathers, let's not bury that. Feathers over the hips, along the arms, down the tail in streamers that shifted the centre of pressure as the animal duked and jumped. They're not to garnish, they're math. A mantle to shade the kill from prying eyes. Insulation to hold the burn steady at dawn. Display flags for the ugly business of rivalries. If you have ever watched Hawk's posture, you've seen the ghost of this already. The notion of a naked lizard ninja turns less scary the more you stare at it. A hawk that refuses to fly but refuses to let go? That's the one you lose sleep to. Evidence of their social life reads like a diary kept underwater. Trackways where 2 or more move the same direction. Not proof of tactics, but proof of comfort in company. Tooth-scarred bones of big herbivores with serration signatures that match dromaeosaurs, sometimes many signatures. A crowd scene captured in enamel. Healed bite marks on raptor bones themselves. Faces that live through misunderstandings resolved with dentistry. You can infer a lot from a jaw that keeps replacing teeth like a company that budgets for attrition. This job eats its tools. There's a pattern to what they chose. Small prey, dispatch alone, a quick pounce, a hold, a few savage bites to arteries and airways. Medium prey, 2 or 3 might converge by accident or design and turn too big for one into too distracted to fight them all. Large prey, that's where Tenontosaurus comes in, not a guaranteed win, never clean, but an opportunity for a long, grim grapple, where patience and angles carry the day. And sometimes the math broke the other way. There are raptor bones among those bone beds too, punctured and scored, because a tail lash that connects or a hoof that says absolutely not writes a different ending. Risk is not a subplot, it's the genre. In the stillness after, the scene looks almost ritualistic. Wings spread over meat, head down, the body hunched into a hooded silhouette. That's not ceremony. It's thermodynamics and theft prevention. Mantle and eat. Tear with the head, brace with the arms, use those notched teeth like a serrated saw against connective tissue that does not want to part. Swallow in hunks, the gut can complain later. Shed a tooth, replace it. The conveyor belt in the jaw never clocked out. Strip the ninjutsu, keep the nightmare. The pointy end of the story is that these weren't choreographed assassins. They were violent problem solvers with bird hardware, a grappling hook toe and a work ethic. They didn't need style points. They needed contact, leverage and time on target. And they had the anatomy to make those things happen in quick succession. That, more than any cinematic kitchen door handle, is what makes them cling to your nerves. Not clever lines, but the mute certainty that once the hook sank in, you were not being let go. The skull is all windows and edges, air scooped out of bone until only struts remain, like a cathedral rebuilt into a weapon. The crests over the eyes aren't there to look pretty, they are the eyebrows of a boxer who knows you're going to swing back. And the jaws, narrow blade racked, not a vice so much as a guillotine that learned to walk. If you came expecting a crush, you've misread the mood. This is a slice, this is a swing, this is a neck that clocks in like a wrecking crew and asks the skull to please stand by. Imagine a late Jurassic floodplain steamed flat by sun, cottonwood-like trees along a meandering channel, dragonflies big enough to look judgmental. Something large is browsing in the mid-distance, Camarasaurus maybe, big-chested and slow-breathing, a living hill of muscle wrapped around an internal elevator. Between you and that walking larder, the understory twitches. What steps out isn't the stocky bulldozer you fear from the Cretaceous. It's long-legged, high-hipped, a predator drawn with fast strokes. The head hangs like a loaded pendulum at the end of a thick, muscled neck. Allosaurus reads the scene the way a chef reads a carcass, where the seams are, where the soft parts hide, which cuts come off clean with one committed motion. Forget the bite-for-bite arm-wrestling myth. Allosaurus did not show up to crush a pelvis into confetti. The skull is lighter than that, the joints more compliant, the fenestry, those big open windows, cut to drop weight and spread stress. Feed those physics the wrong job and they protest. Feed them the right one. Open wide, drive the head down, yank back, and they purr. Picture the motion, spine braced, neck flexor as coil. The head lifts, jaws yawn, and then the whole top half of the animal drops like an axe. Teeth meet flesh with the angry sound of silk tearing. Serrations key into muscle fibers, and the neck does what your gym trainer would call negative work. Pull, lever, rip, bite and drag, hatchet and wrench. The wound is not a circle, it's a long, deep, ragged trench. Those teeth, Zipherdon, recurved, each edge serrated with tiny saw teeth, were made for this. They don't love bone, they tolerate it. They love tendons, fascia, arteries. They love margins and anchors, the things that turn a leg into a leg. When you find sauropod bones from the Morrison Formation with parallel gouges that fit Allosaurus dental spacing, you're looking at the paperwork for this technique filed in triplicate. Ribs scored as if with a meat saw. Pelvic bones etched where the big muscles fasten like mooring lines. There's even a Stegosaurus plate bearing bite marks that line up with a mouth like this. Wrong dinner choice. The entree fought back, but the signature is still legible. The neck is the co-star and it knows it. Neural spines along the vertebrae stand tall like sail stanchions, giving big anchor surfaces to muscles that act like hydraulic rams. It's not subtle. Lift, drop, pull reel, pull repeat until the problem stops being a problem, and because the head is so lightened, with those cavernous openings, the energy you put into motion doesn't die in the skull. It transmits. Think of a thrown punch that actually lands because your wrist didn't wobble. Now scale it to a body that weighs a small car. The arms are a scandal by later giant standards, functional. 3-fingered hands with respectable claws, a shoulder girdle that says yes, I lift, forelimbs that actually reach things, not dainty, not decorative. When the head slams in and sets the first incision, those hands can add pressure, clamp a flank, keep a thrashing limb from turning a precise cut into a rodeo. No, it's not hugging you. It's pinning you where the hatchet can keep working. And because the Jurassic was an equal opportunity nightmare, the prey brought tools too. There's a famous Allosaurus bone with a perfect puncture wound story. A hole consistent with the Stegosaurus tail spike. The image writes itself. A low-slung, heavily armoured herbivore, tail stiff with tendons, 4 spikes like railroad nails, whips the air into a blur. Somewhere in that whiplash, an Allosaurus misjudged distance and learned that not all meals go down. You'll also find steg plates with bite marks and steg spikes with wear. The duel was not theoretical. If you want a children's book version, you won't get it. This reads like a police report. Both parties injured, neither cooperative, scene a mess. Cleveland Lloyd, now a national monument, serves as the choir-loft for this whole story. Bone bed unnervingly rich in Allosaurus. Depending on which scientist you hand the microphone to, it was a predator trap, a drought sink, a slow drip catastrophe that lured big carnivores in one by one until the ground had more teeth than hope. It could also whisper about behaviour. Maybe they tolerated each other around carcasses. Maybe they arrived in 2s and 3s when the scent of hot protein went up like a flag. Pack hunting is a romantic word for animals that likely preferred to keep colleagues at mouth's length, but massed bones are hard to ignore. If not teamwork, then at least overlapping ambitions. Picture a half-dried Camarasaurus in the shallows and 4 Allosaurus circling it like contractors bidding the same job. What does the kill look like when it goes well? Not a prolonged clamp and hold. Jaw muscles here are not built to go 11 rounds squeezing knots out of bone. It's ambush to contact to incision in 3 beats. The first strike sets the geometry. A shoulder or thigh, somewhere load-bearing, somewhere catastrophic, gets opened. The second strike is not far away, an overlapping wound that turns motion into labour pain. The animal starts to falter. Blood makes slopes treacherous. The third strike takes advantage of posture change. Head low becomes head lower. Thorax opens, soft parts offer themselves to physics. It doesn't have to be pretty, it only has to be repeated. The neck is a metronome, the teeth are blades on a ribbon saw, the body stays just out of reach of kicks and sweeps, tail counterbalancing each savage yank. Juveniles complicate the picture, because of course they do. Young Allosaurus wore narrower skulls and slighter frames, fast and slashy where adults were heavier and more tool-like. That smells like niche partitioning. Teenagers nipping at smaller prey, adults stepping in when there's a chance to cut steaks out of a mountain. You can practically chart the handoff in the tooth box. Fine work early, cruder gouges later. An ecosystem that hires its killers by height. There's pathology everywhere you look if you bother to look. Healed ribs, fused vertebra, infections that pocked bone into coral, all the receipts of a job that paid in meat and workplace injuries. Some jaws show breakage and regrowth. Some limb bones carry calluses laid down after violence that didn't finish the story. The point isn't that they were fragile. The point is that they were unlucky often and resilient more often still. You don't grow to top slot in a world of tail spikes and swing-heavy necks without a body that shrugs off Tuesday. Even their skull joints tell you what they were up to. The palate is stiff where it needs to be, but there's a hint of flex across the snout, a way for stresses to distribute instead of detonating at a single seam. A tyrant's head is a one-piece hammer. This is a framed house with braces. Give here, hold there, survive the hit. Open the jaws and the hinge doesn't just rotate, it rolls, creating gape without destroying leverage. Some estimates give it a truly rude opening angle, others are more conservative. Either way, the message is the same. Enough. And then there's the strategy after the mess starts. Many predators prefer to take you apart at the fastening points. Allosaurus is enrolled in that school with honours. The pelvis is a handle, the shoulder another. The base of the neck, that's a zipper with the pull tab sticking out. Once you're down, it's about turning those into entry wounds and widening them until the machinery inside acquiesces to being outside. Shed teeth turn up at these scenes, little black triangles that once lived in the gum line and now lay like dropped scalpels. Replace them, keep working, the jaw never runs out of inventory for long. Group hunting? Maybe sometimes. Group feeding? Almost certainly. Picture 3 big animals around a sauropod hip, each trying to run its hatchet routine without catching an elbow in the eye. The air vibrates with low, irritated grunts. One finds purchase and levers a ribbon of meat free, the others sidestep and go for new angles. There's etiquette of a sort, enforced by whoever has the best leverage at the moment and the least to lose. Bite marks on Allosaurus bones can read like fines paid after a scrum. You cut line, you got cut. The dark comedy is that this whole chassis, so clearly built to swing steel, was also perfectly fine with rearranging the dead. Scavenging wasn't shameful, it was efficient. Find a carcass, drought victim, disease, misstep in a mud pit, and the technique is the same with the risk dial down. If anything, the hatchet method shines brighter at a cold table. Pick a seam, open it a bit wide, eat with a pace that says no one's chasing you yet. If someone does show up, the arms and those long legs install a perimeter, while the head keeps the ledger moving. Stand finally close enough to smell it. The head lifts, strings of dark saliva draw lines that tremble before breaking. The crests above the eyes are scabbed from old misunderstandings. The pupils pin against afternoon glare, and the whole animal rocks on the balls of its feet, balance fine-tuned by a tail that never stops negotiating with gravity. It isn't roaring. Roaring is for the cheap seats. The soundtrack is breath and the wet fabric rip of meat parting. A hatchet doesn't announce, it lands. The fear this thing sells isn't unstoppable force. Plenty of them stopped. The fear is competence with the right tool. In a world of thick hides and angry armour, Allosaurus bet on a fast, deep cut delivered by a head that had somewhere to go and a neck obsessed with getting it there. It wasn't a bone mill, it was a butcher, one who believed correctly that if you make the right hole at the right place at the right time, the rest of the job does itself. Twilight drops like a lid and the floodplain edits itself. Bright things turn grey things turn black, and black things start thinking about dinner. You don't hear the hunter first, you feel a correction in the soundscape. The insects tighten their chorus as if someone leaned on the volume knob. The river goes from gossip to whisper. Then a shadow unstitches from the shadow of a conifer trunk, hip high at most, feathered like a well-worn coat, head cocked as if it's always listening for an answer you can't hear. Owl logic, but with teeth. The eye is the billboard. Huge orbit. Inside, a scleral ring of bony plates frames a pupil that could open into a blackout curtain. That anatomy isn't about glamour shots. It's about harvesting light other animals spill. The face points forward, not sideways. Binocular overlap for depth. So when the head tilts, it's not being cute. It's calculating distance with a built-in rangefinder. Pair that with optic lobes and a swollen forebrain that, among dinosaurs, skew large, and you have a predator wired to turn dimness into geometry. Imagine a night vision scope that eats. Hearing plays second violin only because the eyes hog attention. Deep in the skull, the cochlear duct, the business end of the inner ear, runs long. That correlates with sensitivity to a wider frequency range. Translation: a mouse-sized mammal rustling under leaf litter is a broadcast. A hatchling squeak is a flare. A lizard's toenail ticks over bark and draws an invisible dotted line straight to dinner. The head bobs in those small bird-like arcs, not because drama demands it, but because triangulation is a habit that pays. Everything about the chassis says, fast starts, fine control, the legs run long, the ankles are springs. The tail is a slender ruler you can't bend, stiffened internally to act as a dynamic counterweight, correcting every mid-step correction. The hands matter here in a way they didn't for heavier cousins. At the wrist sits that crescent bone, the semi-lunate carpal, that lets the hand snap inward like a folding knife. The fingers close on a squirming package with real commitment. No human-style palm-down pronation, sure, but who needs to twist a doorknob when your job is clamp small animals to ground while your face writes the rest of the story? You've heard legends about killer toes, and yes, the second digit rides high. The claw curved and laterally compressed like a talon that never learned to be polite. It's smaller than the oversized meat hook on the big dromaeosaurs, but it's not ornamental. It's a grappling aid, a traction nail, a persuader. It pins prey the way a climber plants a piton. Here and now everything else can hang off that one unwavering point. Bite marks on tiny bones sometimes read as miniature crime scenes. Puncture and hold, rake and release, a night shift signature you could roll for fingerprints if you were willing to admit you live in a world where fingerprints are serrations. Open the mouth and the teeth tell on the diet. Not bone crushers, not razor sabers, more like a toolbox of recurved blades with serrations tuned for soft tissue and, in some species, a heterodont hint. Front teeth slender, back teeth chunkier, as if the predator couldn't resist sampling everything the dark offered. Insect gristle, vertebrate meat, eggs when the calendar allowed. It reads like omnivory shading into opportunistic carnivory. Toothwear patterns whisper nibbling, nipping, not just wholesale tearing. If there's a nest in range, the calculus simplifies. Eggs are night-stored sunlight, pre-packaged calories with a shell you can score into compliance. Watch a hunt with your brain's camera set to pre-dawn blue. The troodontid pauses at the edge of a fern-choked clearing and lets the rest of the world announce itself. Something ticks 3 meters low. The animal freezes into a silhouette that seems carved, feathers down, tail level, 1 foot lifted just enough to keep tendons warm. There is no dramatic pounce. There's a slide, a glide, a step that stops in the instant before sound happens. Then a flick. The raised toe kisses down and bites. The hands close. The head drops and those little serrated knives do work, quick and ugly. The prey, mouse, lizard, frog, hatchling, stops being a sound and starts being heat. If the menu reads bigger, the method flexes. A sleeping juvenile hadrosaur in a nest hollow. The troodontid unthreads the edge of the group, picks out the one exiled from the warm middle, and manufactures a zero problem in the dark. The first bite isn't theatrical, it targets an artery-rich place, neck, inner thigh, because blood loss is the most obedient ally in any night operation. The foot hooks, the hands press, the head saws small. There's no weight class cheating here. Try to fight an adult and you become a footnote in a larger animal's autobiography. But pick your targets like a coward with a mortgage and you eat more often than you die. It's easy to grant malice where there's only method, and nighttime makes method look like malice. The feathers ruffle against dew. The silhouette mantles over a kill not to perform but to hide dinner from brighter, heavier, meaner eyes. Mantling traps heat too, letting a hot-running metabolism keep its savings account intact before the sun writes day across your world again. The dark is a time budget as much as a safety feature, hours to hunt when the roads are clear. Parental life makes a sideways entrance and refuses to leave. There are eggs set in tidy rings, pairs leaning together like amphorae in a cellar, half buried, as if the adult had the good sense to let the ground handle incubation duty. The clutches look like someone with too much energy arranged them with intention. And nearby, in another place, a little troodontid is found forever sleeping, head tucked under forelimb, tail wrapped around, the whole pose a bird's lullaby fossilized. Ash probably did the tucking in, the animal did the rest. That posture is an admission. This is a body that knows how to save heat, how to turn into itself when the air goes cold and the stars get bright. Stars matter, by the way, even if only as a backdrop for the horror. Night here is not a modern suburban gradient. It's a river of light across a black vault. A small feathered predator navigates not by constellations but by edges and smells and the algebra of trees. You can tell when it's thinking, the small head cocks, the pauses that aren't paralysis but processing. The brain case humbles our prejudice. For its size, this is a lot of brain, a lot of sensory real estate. If you want to call it clever, call it the kind of clever that survives. Pattern recognizing, rote memorizing, risk weighing. No poetry about it, only results. Results come with invoices. Healed fractures cross ribs like faded lightning. Tooth marks on their faces too. Misunderstandings with neighbours negotiated in enamel. A missing toe here, a kinked tail there. Both repaired by a body that assumes the world will not help. Even their teeth keep a budget, shed and replaced as business expenses. Find the little dark triangles in the sediment where a nest once was, and you're looking at maintenance records. Competition clocks in late and never leaves early. Crocodilians own the water margins and do not appreciate poachers. Snakes and mammals own the underbrush and would like you to know today was not a good day to try that. Big theropods have no respect for small craft advisories. The troodontid survives by knowing where the big boots don't step after dark and how to be somewhere else by the time they do. A whisper of speed helps, so does refusing to be brave. Bravery is for courting, and even then it comes wrapped in calculation. Picture a clearing in the hour before dawn, 2 animals posturing, feathers fluffed into silhouette, tails held level like rulers measuring the distance between life and injury. The calls are not lion roars. Think sharp churs, whistles, soft barks, sounds that carry just far enough and not a step farther. A short rush, a check, a peck that's half threat and half negotiations, then separation, a resumed patrol. Every performance trimmed to the edge of no hospital. You can reverse the camera and watch them instead as prey. The same senses that harvest whispers also detect a bigger shadow halting the whisper entirely. The freeze response isn't fear, it's math. A statue is data resistant. If the shadow keeps coming, the body unspools into a low sprint. Tail tightrope straight, feet writing fast, precise notes on the ground, up a low bank, around a trunk, into brush that matches your feather silhouette, and you're a rumour again. If it goes wrong, if the teeth behind you are too close, you juke hard and trust the tail to erase the mistake from the record. Even the way they eat reads like a thesis on efficiency. Small kills go down in hunks, whole if they'll fit, swallowed with a forward snap and a controlled slide. You could imagine, given the avian angle, that some nights ended with a neat little pellet hacked up at roost, a consolidation of fur and bone the gut refused, but imagination isn't evidence, so file that under plausible and impolite. What we do get are the marks they leave elsewhere, chew patterns on tiny bones, a scatter of shells from raided nests, claw scratches where they scrambled up a bank too fast to be elegant. By dawn, they're ghosts again. Feathers flatten, the eye shrinks its aperture. A roost is a good branch over bad water, a burrow mouth with a quick exit, a hollow between roots that holds warmth for an hour more. The animal settles, head tucks, breath slows. The floodplain exhales and pretends nothing happened. If you want to catch the truth, you come back when the light thins and the insects rehearse dread. You learn to see the not quite black moving through the black. You learn to hear the absence that announces a presence. Call them clever if you must. Call them sneaks, burglars, owls with bad intentions, auditors of the dark. The names aren't the point. The point is the plan. Big eyes for the hours when edges blur and prey forgets to be careful. Long legs for sudden math. A brain that sips information instead of gulps at it. A toolkit of small knives for creating opportunity out of soft places. In a world of hammerheads and hatchets, this is the razor that only comes out when the lights go down. Begin with a river that doesn't sparkle, it smoulders. Heat lays on it like a blanket someone forgot to fold. Dragonflies skate low, the reckless ones, while something under the surface writes rude messages in ripples. North Africa, Cretaceous, not a desert yet, a wet braid of channels, oxbows and seasonal floodplains swaddled in mud and ambition. The shoreline is a ledger of tracks, turtle drags, croc belly slides, pterosaur pinpricks, and there, deep, wide slid, footprints that look like someone pressed dinner plates into clay. Follow them and you meet the rumour. A long, low body with a sail for a spine and a head shaped like a crocodile's bad dream. The face is the thesis. Narrow rostrum, elongated premaxilla with a tooth rosette, a little fish trap built into bone, conical teeth smooth as wet porcelain. No steak knife serrations here, Serrations shred, but shredding loses fish. These teeth puncture and hold. They're spaced to interlock. A jail cell door that slams shut on slippery things with too many fins. The nostrils sit farther back than fashion recommends, retracted from the tip. A design tweak that lets the business end go underwater while breathing remains optional. Along the snout, a map of tiny pits and canals, sensory plumbing, picks up pressure tremors, the underwater gossip of tails and gills. You don't need to see if you can feel the river talking. The body is an argument with gravity. High-spined vertebrae stitch a sail up the back, a billboard, a radiator, a social signal, a little of each, depending on the day and the paper you read. Once, the tale was imagined ordinary. Then a different kind of fossil memo arrived. Vertebrae at the back wearing outlandish neural spines and deep chevrons, creating a tall, flexible blade. The tail wasn't an afterthought. It was a paddle. Pair that with bones dense as gilt, heavy with minerals so buoyancy stops making all the decisions, and the silhouette changes from land carnivore, who moonlights at the water's edge, to river specialist who tolerates dry ground when necessary. Stand with it at the margin where brown water licks brown mud. The head hovers just above the surface, nostrils in the dry, eyes scanning reflections that don't behave. The forelimbs are not the mocking stubs of some cousins. They're robust, the first digit capped by a scythe of keratin, a hook that pins, drags, persuades. The hind limbs, short for a theropod of this bulk, plant wide with the confidence of an animal that doesn't plan to sprint, just to lean. The feet, broad, splayed, press into the silt until physics admits defeat. If there are webs between the toes, nature keeps that detail coy. But the print reads surface area, and surface area reads, stay up where the meat is. Every few heartbeats, the water writes a footnote. A sore-nosed ray, Onchopristis, flickers along the shallows like a razor with a tail. A coelacanth the size of your pessimism loiters in the slack current. Lungfish work mud into pudding. Turtles cruise like armoured bread loaves. Crocodiliforms with names longer than your patients patrol like Union lifeguards. Somewhere out there, a rival theropod, deep-chested, knife-toothed, prefers its meals with less water. You can feel the tension, a food web thick as a net, with this thing, the long-skulled sail shadow, as the knot you don't pull on. It hunts like a rumour you're half sure you invented. Not a charge, not a roar. It watches the skin of the river the way a heron does, only longer, heavier, with more patience and worse manners. A pressure wave divulges a fish moving wrong, too high, too curious, too slow, and the head slides forward, barely awake, jaws opening just enough. The bite is not a slash, it's a fast, deep clamp delivered across a small target with offensive accuracy. Those conical teeth sink in without creating neat slices. They make holes fish can't negotiate out of. A sideways wrench, a lift, and the river relinquishes its claim. Water drips in lines from teeth that don't care. They weren't designed to look cinematic. The tongue pushes, the throat accepts, the world goes on. At other hours, patience gets replaced by arithmetic. The animal wades into a narrowing channel at dusk and stands where the current forces fish to commit, through or die. The sail shadows the water, a vertical rumour that might scatter the bold into the bank where four limbs with fishing hooks for thumbs can do the rest. Tail flicks become punctuation, a steadying swish, a corrective curl. Sometimes, when the body yields to deeper water, a drive stroke that shoves several tons of prehistoric ill will forward in a way that makes mud boil up from the bottom. You don't need dolphin acceleration when your prey is pinned between your mouth and the river's bad choices. If a turtle wanders too close to the now not lonely shoreline, the mood shifts. Fish eating isn't a vow, it's a tendency. Turtles are calories with handles. A sideways lunge turns slow into broken. The hook hand pins the shell as the jaws find a seam, not to crush it like a tyrant would, but to pry. A bite to the neck, a levering twist at the limb girdle, and the shell yields. Everything yields. If the day brings something with wings, pterosaur skimming for fish at low altitude, clever but not omniscient, there are records of spinosaur teeth and pterosaur bones concluding that mutual interest can be terminal. You want to imagine it on land, because land is where our fear knows the rules. You get a mixed answer. The centre of mass sits forward. The hips argue with proportion. The whole platform looks designed to shuffle rather than sprint, a giant built for committed paths, not pirouettes. But awkward isn't helpless. If the river recedes and a carcass ripens on a bar, it walks there, plants those shoveling feet, and starts the work of ownership. That skull still bites, those arms still drag, and the sail turns into a flag that says, with admirable clarity, no. If something insolent with knife teeth and pride arrives, Carcharodontosaur for instance, the shoreline becomes a chessboard no one really wants to play on. One is faster, one is at home. The river decides who's brave and who's smart. There is a particular sound to a shallow water ambush. It isn't the thrash first, it's the silence that wraps the thrash, the world holding its breath because the physics of the moment require fewer witnesses. Then, spray, violence, mud in the air, like smoke. The tail writes cursive under the surface, head swings, jaws open and shut with the surety of a trap that has never once doubted itself. A sawfish tries to saw its way out. A lungfish tries to breathe its way out. A croc decides today is not the hill it dies on and slides backward into deeper honesty. The predator's feet churn and plant, a slow-walking dance that keeps the mouth where the failures are. The sail is a character in the story, and not just for spectacle. Blood vessels run beneath skin that heats and cools like a mood ring. In morning light after a cold night, it may drink sun by square meters. In the afternoon, standing in wind over open water, it may shed heat like a wet sheet on a line. Or maybe, honestly, sometimes it's a billboard. I'm here, I'm huge, think twice. Imagine two of them in profile at opposite bends of a channel. Sails tilted until they read each other like flags, deciding whether today's argument is solved with theatre or scars. You can read a lot of biology across a tattered membrane. Healed injuries turn fossils into biographies. A spine with infection scabbed into bone. A limb with a callus fattened over a crack. A jaw with the abscess lines. Notes from a life of bad footing and worse neighbours. Teeth shed like confetti at a violent party crop up in the mudstone. Glossy black triangles with circular cross-sections, edges smooth, tips blunted from too many honest collisions with armoured prey and inconvenient geology. You can picture a mouthful of replacements lined up behind the front row like understudies who know the star is going to blow through their contracts. There are different days on this revue. Some are famine and some are parade. Flood season stacks fish in side channels until even the birds look lazy. Drought drops water levels and concentrates everything alive into geometry with teeth on its margins. The predator adjusts because adjusting is the job. On good days it is choosy, discarding parts and chasing perfect bites. On bad days it is a harvester that does not care if the filly is still twitching. When the water gets low enough and the channel becomes a necklace of pools, it moves between them like a rumour with knees, checking each for the high noise of life. Sometimes it lies down in water shallow enough to embarrass it, cooling the engine, sail casting a shade that smells like ownership. There is a difference between swimming and being of the water, and it lives in the bone. Heavy bones mean the body sinks unless told otherwise. Air-filled bones are what you give flyers and sprinters who need compromises with gravity. Here, density reads as intent. You don't want to bob, You want to choose. To step forward and keep stepping while your torso is submerged. To stand on the bottom like a problem. To push off and glide with a tail that understands drag. All of this sounds less like a land killer visiting the buffet, and more like a resident at his table. Not that it's married to fish. Bones don't blush, and they record open relationships. The gut contents of its cousins say mostly fish, with a sly, but also whatever was careless at the shore. If a juvenile iguanodon wandered down for a sip in the wrong era and wrong continent, similar jaws made similar decisions. If the carcass of something big washed into a backwater and the smell outran the flies, this animal arrived with a tool set that doesn't care whether the meat once breathed air or filtered it through gills. Imagine the night shift. The river glosses over into a black ribbon, with stars shredded into it by the current. Frogs declare anger at everything. Insects bounce sound off the sail like rain on a drum. The head glides just beneath the surface, only the nostril ridge cutting a thin line that pretends to be a breeze. Pressure sense reads his wakes like fingerprints. Somewhere to the left, a school of fish forgets not to panic. The wave front of their mistake brushes the snout, and the tail writes a powerful cursive that ends in contact. The strike is nearly invisible, the aftermath loud. What you hear after is chewing that isn't chewing, just the business of a long skull organising a mouthful of slippery math. Sometimes there's theatre you didn't ask for. A croc the length of a small boat decides the shelf is his. The long-skulled sail shadow decides the shelf is a public utility. A head surfaces, eyes like chips of old glass, both mouths opening not to bite but to measure. The croc hisses, the sail twitches and draws itself taller, a dark damp flag with sunlight's memory. For a moment the river holds two alphabets upright, then someone calculates risk better, and the water closes over the loser's ego. On land, the camera is unforgiving. The hips don't lie, they roll a little too much, like a wrestler cutting weight. The tail, freed from its service in thrust, swings less elegantly. You could outrun it if the ground didn't argue, if you weren't already ankle-deep in nostalgia for dry socks, if you hadn't made the error of being between it and something it is willing to own. The hand claw isn't for high-fiving, it is a meat hook, and it knows that history is written by whoever keeps their grip. A drag across mud leaves parallel grooves that end in a smear the colour of endings. It is not a monster, it is a specialist so confident it looks like superstition. The skull says fish, the bones say water, the teeth say please slip, the tail says hold my river, the sail says many things, and all of them are versions of watch. In a world that made knives and hatchets and bone crushers, this is the thing that learned how to be a trap disguised as shoreline. If you are sensible, you watch the water differently after seeing it. Like anybody sensible, you begin to understand that the calm surface is absolutely not a promise. The hills are red like old bruises, baked and flaking under a sun that doesn't care who remembers what happened here. Wind combs the scrub and raises little ghosts of dust along the ridges, as if the ground exhaled names. In this brick-coloured country, Patagonia before postcards, bones come out of the cliffs the way secrets come out of families. Piecemeal, inconvenient but consistent. Follow a dry arroyo down and you arrive at an absence with edges, a place where the earth has been carefully taken apart to reveal a crowd. Not one killer, not two, a scatter of them, at least 7 different sizes, all the same blade-toothed story. The red herd. Meet the implication before you meet the animal. A bone bed that smells like a meeting, even if it was only a catastrophe that forgot to spread out its victims. Skulls and vertebrae, ribs and limb bones, juveniles shadowing subadults shadowing their elders. Whatever brought them together, drought, baited trap, overlapping hungers, left enough to suggest that these were not solitary knives accidentally stored in the same drawer. You can argue about intention. The rock only writes simultaneous in italics when it feels generous. But standing here in the heat, it's hard not to see choreography even if it was only tolerance. A red hillside where big predators arrived more than once with business, and sometimes the business outlived them. Now step out of the dust and into the animal. Imagine a body long as a bus, hips high enough to argue with the lower branches, a tail that balances the rest like a counter on the butcher's scale. The head that swings at the front is not a mallet, it is a cleaver. Carcharodontosauride, which is fancy Greek for shark-toothed lizard, and the teeth live up to the marketing. Laterally compressed, recurved, serrated like industrial steak knives that never learned subtlety. No marrow crusher here. This is a slicer. A machine for opening meat along the lines of force. The skull is big, but it's webbed with windows, bone trussed into struts to save weight and root stress, like a cathedral architect who forgot the part about God and remembered only gravity. Run a finger, let's be hypothetical, along one tooth's edge, and you feel the denticles, tiny crowbars lined up shoulder to shoulder. In the mouth of a living animal, they gleamed with the same promise a saw blade gleams with. You don't take down a giant and then whittle at it with apologies. You draw deep, long cuts at tendon anchor points. You turn locomotion into leaking. You let the ground do half the killing. A method built around paychecks called artery and fatigue. The neighbourhood offers a dare almost too big to resist. The strata here also birth vertebrae from a creature that was basically a mobile hill. Argentinosaurus, a titanosaur so large that the numbers feel like punchlines. You don't fight something like that. You edit it. You hunt the context, not the mass. A herd spreads out into a line to cross a drainage. You wait at the pinch point. A youngster falls behind because the drought has pulled the good green two valleys away. You teach it about gravity and poor time management. Adults can do math too, and sometimes they misstep. The canyon edge gives, a knee groans, and now there's a church bell ringing meat in the ravine. Picture the approach, not a sprint. These bodies read best at committed pace. The led animal doesn't roar, it watches. The others ghost the flanks, loose, no battle plan whiteboarded in the sky, just a consensus about the problem. Isolate and unbalance. The Titan's tail is a counter-argument as long as a street, thick with tendon, a whip that can erase bravery and skulls in one gesture. But counters have blind spots. When it swings, it opens the opposite side. When it plants, it telegraphs. The predators learn the rhythm or die trying. There are healed fractures in their bones to prove both outcomes occurred. Contact isn't cinematic, it's surgical and rude. A Maposaurus, let's finally say the name, threads the gap behind the forelimb, where the axillary flesh is rich with vessels and the shoulder girdle holds 1,000 pounds of purpose together. The jaws open wide, serrations kiss skin, and the neck does the rest. A hard, pulling sweep that writes a long, awful smile through tendon and fascia. Another slash rakes the inner thigh, where the adductors clutch the pelvis. An animal this big stumbles when those go. Bleeding is not drama for an animal with a heart the size of a barrel, it's physics. Every step becomes bookkeeping, the red kind. The one with the best angle does not own the scene. The others are not patient. They orbit where the tail is not. They dip in, carve and slip out. No perfect choreography. These are not wolves with resumes, but a pressure tested by 1,000 years of mornings that ended with meat. The herd of predators moves like weather around a mountain. Eddies, gusts, a prevailing direction toward collapse. The titanosaur calls, a low-building hum that presses your teeth. The ground tells you it's time to reconsider your comfort with large open spaces. It doesn't always work. The fossil record keeps receipts with unnecessary honesty. A Carcharodontosaurid vertebra from a not-so-lucky day shows infection scabbed into bone, the footprint of a tail spike, a rib broken and healed lumpy after a misread angle. There are grooves on sauropod bones, long parallel spaced like the teeth in that cleaver skull, that say, plainly. This hurts something that couldn't die fast enough. There are also ribs snapped like dry bread on the predator side that say equally plainly, today someone's plan A met a tail that wasn't tired. On the days the math does break the predator's way, the aftermath looks like a city dissolving, a fallen titan's terrain. The first job is to keep it. A big head lowers and cuts a shawl of flesh free across the belly seam. The part butchers love because biology already started the line for you. The hands, useful here, not vestigial jokes, brace and push. The feet dig and hold, the neck levers as the serrations soar. Meat comes off in slabs that steam in cool air and shimmer in hot. You can practically see the oil stutter in the heat as the red hillside smells first like iron and then like food. The others do not ask permission. The red herd is a bureaucracy of intimidation with no forms to file. One shoulders another off the good angle and pays a fine in tooth marks. Healed gouges on their faces are the minutes from meetings like this. Bite, heal, remember. Lesser carnivores, the ones built to snatch and run, who ring the scene and perform their mathematics of opportunity. A crocodiliform slides from a pool like a shadow. A handful of small theropods inventory the fringes. A Mapusaurus swings its head. Not quite a threat display, more like a calculation. How much energy is a warning worth when the counter-argument is, I am already eating? The wind lifts a curtain of dust off the hide and shows you the scale. Each bite mark is a paragraph. Here, at the pelvis, tidy parallel gouges, where the hamstring anchors untied. There, on the ribs, skip marks where teeth chattered along bone, as the head pulled back. A serrated blade biting and releasing and biting again. You can match tooth spacing to the jaw the way a locksmith matches a key to a lock. People do with measuring tapes and patience and the particular excitement paleontologists get when murder aligns with math. If you step away from the carcass and back out into the red hills, the whole country looks like a system designed to select for this kind of persistence. Seasonal rivers that boom and then sulk. Vegetation that can turn the colour of hard times and stay that way until a storm reconsiders. Herds of giants moving like weather fronts across distances that tire maps. A predator that is less a single animal and more a principle. Blades, leverage, group tolerance when it pays, an appetite scaled to the available calories. No mythic malice, just arithmetic done with teeth. There's a different hunt that plays out where the prey is merely large instead of biblical. An iguanodont, heavy and fast, cuts between stands of scrub to reach a sandbar where greener things pretend to be promises. The red herd ghosts it along the lee side of a low rise, figures out where the turn will go wrong, the bend where the bank is steep, the slope where the soil slides. Then one appears in the iguanodont's future like a clause it forgot to read, and the rest arrive from the margins. It kicks and means it. One catches a thigh for its honesty and limps into next season carrying the story under its skin. Still the plan is the plan. Open, unbalance, wear down, keep your bones out of the places where their bones swing hardest. Hearts and lungs get votes too, which is why the first cuts aim at the places that vote early. Under the forelimb, behind the knee, base of the tail where nerves are loud and muscles lie thick. You can imagine, because the bones tell you, a predator moving almost like a matador, working the margins, never letting the horn, or in this case the tail or the shoulder, claim the right of reply. Not elegant, efficient. The difference is academic to the thing that stops running. There are days when the red herd has to practice humility. Drought squeezes the valley, and the river pulls its water into the middle and drags those without plans along the bottom. The smell of death becomes a weather report. Scavenging turns from side hustle to survival strategy. The bone bed was likely written on one of those days. One animal comes for a carcass and finds mud that acts like a liar. It holds you differently than it looks. Another comes because blood travels farther than sound. Another because meat smells like an invitation you can't turn down. One by one, ankles vanish, physics has its laugh, and a future paleontologist gets a harvest. Cooperative hunting, maybe. Cooperative dying. The cliffs raise a hand. You can get sentimental about that. The rock does not. Inspect the bones and you'll find growth rings, remodelling, the changing histology of an animal that went from juvenile knife to subadult saboteur to adult butcher. Each life stage filling a niche the way an orchestra fills the hall. Different instruments, same symphony. The teenagers probably harassed smaller prey, honed the bite and pull routine on things that could only ruin your day, not your career. The elders brought mass to the party, turned deep cuts into incapacitation with a single committed sweep of the head. You can almost plot the handoff on a graph of tooth wear and neck muscle scars. Everything about them says they were built to get hurt and keep moving. Fused bone where spring met habit. Healed greenstick fractures on ribs that learn not to be in the wrong place twice. Abscessed jaws that nevertheless kept their edges and kept their owners fed. Teeth replaced as casually as fingernails because tools in this business are consumables. Drop one in a carcass and another steps into the slot with the quiet confidence of a conveyor belt that has never once stopped. Once you've seen it, the sailless, cleaver-skulled silhouette knifing along a ridgeline, the not-quite pack threading the gullies, you start reading the country differently. A wash is not just a wash, it's a funnel. A windbreak is a blind. A grassless plain is not empty. It's an honest ledger of pressure and response. And the red is iron and sun and time, yes, but it's also a palette that makes the mind play tricks. You see stains where there are none, hear flies where only wind exists, imagine big bodies moving with the assurance of things that know they can keep moving until they don't. In the end, the horror isn't that they hunted together like masterminds, it's that they didn't have to. The landscape did half the planning, the prey did the advertising every time it had to cross a bad piece of ground, and the predators were simply competent enough to show up with blades and a work ethic. A red herd against red hills, and if you listen long enough, the wind that peels dust off the cliffs sounds like pages turning. The story is always the same: isolate, open, outlast. The punctuation marks are teeth, the revisions are scars. The editor is hunger, and his policy never changes. They come thin and long-legged, all shin and speed and reckless calculus, the awkward years if awkwardness were a weapon. The skull hasn't ballooned into the brick of a bone mill yet. It's narrower, a snout that seems to reach for the world before the body gets there. The teeth are not the round cross-section chisels of future legend. They are blades, recurved, serrated, slim, meant for making openings rather than conclusions. If the adult is a wrecking ball, the teenager is a set of scalpels on a metronome. Dawn reveals them as silhouettes first, essay bent necks, tails held level like tightropes pulled taut between urgency and balance. They course along river bars and through sage-green flats with a stride that wastes nothing. Hip over knee over ankle in a sequence you could set your pulse by. The feet are long, the metatarsus pinched into that arctometatarsalien column, an engineered springboard that takes the sting out of impact and sells it back as forward motion. Where an adult makes the ground remember, these make it forget they were there at all. The floodplain is a bulletin board. Hatchling footprints like stitched commas, hadrosaur trails splayed into anxious fans, a gouge where something slipped and corrected badly. The teenagers read it like gossip and choose a problem sized to their hardware. Not the fortress with horns and a shield surrounded by angry uncles, not the iron-sided matriarch with a tale that petitions the afterlife. They pick the margins, yearling hadrosaurs, subadult ceratopsians one storm away from confidence, fast ornithomimids that are fast enough for until today. The strategy is not domination. Yet. It's destabilization. Cuts at places where the body convinces itself it can keep running right up to the moment it can't. First contact is rude and surgical. A juvenile tyrant ghosts out from the cottonwoods, flares its chest with a gulp of air, and accelerates just enough to erase the distance to a hadrosaur the size of a small car. The bite goes high and back on the thigh, where the adductors fasten meat to pelvis, a serrated rake that writes 3 inches of bad news into tendon. Not a clamp, a striping pull. Blood down the leg turns the next step into a negotiation the prey is ill-equipped to win. A second teenager arrives on the other side like a clause that closes the sentence. Slash, recoil, reassess, always moving, always letting the wound do more of the work than the jaw. Listen closely and you can hear the difference in machinery. The head snaps and returns, a sewing motion more than a hammer blow. The neck is a coiled cable, not yet the crane of adulthood, and it loves repetition, small savage bites that multiply into catastrophe. Teeth chatter along hide and muscle and sometimes bone, leaving parallel score marks a museum can measure later, with calipers and delight. The adults will one day leave pits, big oval punctures with crushed margins and pulverized cortex. Teenagers leave lines, carefully spaced, like signatures written by someone who enjoys their pen. Are they together by plan or by gravity? The bone record is coy, but scenes like this read like competence multiplied rather than coordinated genius. 3 shadows not shoulder to shoulder, but strung out like punctuation, comma, comma, exclamation point. They don't circle and bay like wolves. They flow and lance, repelled by the same tail swipes and fear-crazed kicks that bring them darting back in at fresh angles. If one over-commits and earns a hoof to the ribs, it stumbles away with tomorrow's callus in progress and the lesson filed under "Don't stand where kinetics happen." The skin on these runners catches light as a dull sheen. Pebbled, tough, a living boot. Maybe somewhere a fine down lifted from hatchling flanks when mornings went mean. Family history is complicated in this lineage, but out here the armour is hide and nerve and a refusal to quit. The eyes face forward, the binocular overlap wide, and they keep locking the future into distances the legs can annihilate. The nose keeps a ledger of heat and fear and iron, and even when the wind lies, the ground doesn't. They don't just see a herd, they see its mistake moving inside it. There is a particular joy to the way they take corners. Watch one overrun a bend on a sandbar and write a half circle of sliding panic into the damp, the tail swinging the other way with equal conviction, eyes never leaving the target. The foot lands again and the whole animal snaps back to vector as if attached by cable to its intention. Momentum is not permission, it's currency, and these know how to spend it. The bodies tell you they are young even when the skulls don't. Growth rings in the long bones, microscopic winter-summer tattoos, are spaced like the intervals between bad decisions. Then a rush. The histology goes chaotic, bone laid down fast, porous, vascular, the body stacking kilograms the way a storm stacks dark along the horizon. The teenage surge is a biological crime spree. Height in handfuls, muscle in bales, appetite like a law you can't appeal. Their world shrinks to loops between kill, water, shade, kill again, while the skeleton races to keep ahead of the engine it's strapped to. They live in the penumbra of giants and know it. In the afternoon, a shadow falls across the sage, and it isn't a cloud. The trio goes still, not in fear exactly, but in accounting. An adult tyrant steps out, lips pulled back from teeth thick as thumbs, skull the size of a hinge-backed trunk, breath a furnace. The little blades become suddenly very careful knives. Everyone thinks about ownership. Everyone thinks about distance. Sometimes the teenagers posture anyway, shoulders stiff, tails lifted, a performance almost comical beside that brick of a head. Sometimes one miscalculates and gets corrected in the only language adulthood understands, a face bite that leaves a row of scallops along the maxilla and a limp in the confidence. Heals, yes. Forgets, no. Scavenger or hunter is the grown-up's argument. Adolescence refuses binaries. If there's a carcass leaking into the grass and the smell is right and the wind is wrong for bigger reputations, they angle in, heads low, legs cocked for insult, and start at the places that come free, for those without a press capable of turning ribs to gravel. The armpits, the groin, the throat where skin thins across chords that once moved a very loud life. Teeth skim along bone and score it without daring to punch deep. And later, in rock, those shallow furrows will be a footnote under someone's slide labelled subadult feeding traces. They practice on everything because everything is practice. Turtles face down get turned into lessons about leverage. Claw the shell edge, nip the limb, yank, retreat. Fish stranded in a side pool after the river thinks itself become sprint drills with snacks. A knot of hatchling ceratopsians, adorable, reckless, turns into a test of who can separate one from the frenzy first. Not every day pays well. Hunger stains the belly flat and forces decisions the legs wouldn't choose. A teenager with a bad week looks at a dragonfly and wonders if there's a meal hiding inside an insult. What they lack in mass, they rent from time, tenacity graded by minutes. A hadrosaur calf wobbles as the cuts widen. The air trembles with that low contrabass moan big plant eaters use to purchase sympathy from the universe. Parents pivot, a wall of muscle and bone and devotion that can fix anything except physics. One teenager breaks contact early, reading the angle on a mother's femur as a future he doesn't want to live through. Another hangs on and comes away with a hide scarf and the knowledge that next time almost is still no. By evening, the wind rises and the insects pass the microphone around and lie about how brave they'd have been. The teenagers find a lee and stand like punctuation marks against a dying sky, sides moving fast but steady. One worries a splinter owl from between two teeth with a tongue that tries to be helpful and settles for persistent. Another lowers its head and presses the side of its face to the knee it jammed 3 hours earlier. Eyes half-lidded, a meditation on pain as a teacher. The third watches the far tree line for motion that means older trouble, head tilting clicks, nostrils tasting the direction of regret. They sleep badly, each in a shape that keeps everything important under everything else important, legs folded, tail curled as counterweight and blanket. If you got close enough in the dark, you will not. You'd hear breaths measuring the space between realism and dreams of violence. A night breeze fingers the pebbled skin, finds old scars and new, reads them like braille. Some of those scars are elegant rakes from hadrosaur manual claws. Some are circular little oaths from horn nubs that will be more convincing next year. Some are scalloped tracks of familial education, the kind only an adult of your own kind can deliver, with that combination of boredom and accuracy. Morning again, and the floodplain edits itself into contrast. The teenagers switch on like appliances, legs that want miles, eyes that want motion, stomachs that want apology. A juvenile ceratopsian picks a path too exposed between two stands of horsetail. The trio lifts into a lope that feels like a decision the horizon made for them. It bolts. They fan. One cuts across its nose, not to intercept but to force a turn into softer ground. Another flanks and doodles a line of shallow bites along the inner thigh, tick marks in a ledger. The third comes late and fast, reads the stumble as an invitation, and lands a slashing kiss at the base of the neck that turns forward into down. There's a moment, the one that lives under your skin after the rest of the scene runs out of breath, when the prey is on its side, hooves threshing a dying essay about denial, and all three teenagers become still as statues. Not reverence, calculation, where next, which seam opens best, whose mouth is closest to something that ends arguments. Then the tableau breaks, and the cutting resumes, and the grass decides to remember this place as a lie. Growth is a fuse burning toward an explosion of mass, and they can feel the heat on their backs. Knees ache in new ways that don't mean injury. Teeth fall out more often because the jaw is writing replacements as quickly as it writes its autobiography on the world. Food has to keep up with the bone factory, or the factory sends unpaid bills to muscle and mood. Some days they feel like small gods. Some days they feel like the world scaled up too quickly and left them running on a treadmill that eats the floor. The adults are both threat and prophecy. When the big heads roll through willows toward a carcass, the teenagers lift away into the shadows and pretend they prefer shade. When the big heads don't roll through, when the wind lies in a different key, the teenagers step into the vacancy the way opportunists always do, and discover that competence at 40% scale is still competence. They are the hinge the ecosystem swings on, between nimble knives and blunt catastrophes, cleaners of edges, writers of thin scars on bone that will look like whispers beside the craters to come. Once, near a side channel, where the water carries the taste of iron and old eucalyptus. Ghosts. A teenager misjudges a bank, slides, and goes in up to the hip. The panic is instant and just evident. Crocodilian eyes unspool like beads from the surface. But speed and spite are good flotation. It scrabbles, claws cutting loam, tail lashing, and comes up with only humiliation and a lesson about the colour of water that means no. The others watch without helping. They will never help, and when it stands, dripping and furious, they look past it at the heron lifting away, at the ripples fanning from a lungfish that has no idea how close it came to being an anecdote. The world doesn't pause for any one story, not even a good one. There's nothing moral here, only ratios. Muscle to mass, stride length to ground honesty, tooth length to skin thickness, hunger to opportunity. The teenagers manage those ratios with a competence that looks like cunning from a distance and like adaptation up close. Later, they will thicken. The skull will cube out, the bite will change jobs, the teeth will learn to love bone. For now, their cruelty is quick and narrow, surgical rather than catastrophic, and the floodplain is full of problems that only quick and narrow can solve. By the time the sun climbs, the trio has gone thin and long again, scribbling across distance toward the smell of something that might be luck. Behind them, in the shallow channel, where the hadrosaur bled out, the water runs rust for a yard and then remembers how to be a mirror. In the mud beside it, the score marks are already softening at the edges. In a few days, a storm will erase the handwriting. In a few million years, someone with careful hands will pull up a bone with fine, parallel grooves and say softly, "Teenager." And be right. The first warning isn't a roar, it's geometry. The horizon does that trick where it bulges, then moves, low, wide, inevitable. At ground level, the air shivers with flies and heat, and then the brush unknits around a tank. Every angle on this animal looks like a choice. Brow horns thrown forward like two sharpened convictions, nose horn a dagger between them, frill a wall of bone that says keep talking. The forelimbs stomp potholes into the earth. The beak is parrot keen, the kind that could edit a sapling into confetti just to prove it was bored. The eye, surprisingly human, tracks a shadow that's trying to be clever. You are promised herbs and peace. Instead, you get a living palisade. The skull alone is most of the head count. A helmet the size of a card table, neck vertebrae fused into a single armoured spool so the business end can't be folded backward like a bad decision. The brow horns aren't just ornaments, their levers driven by neck and shoulder the way a crowbar is driven by a frustrated contractor. When they hit, it isn't poke so much as upend your plans and introduce you to gravity. Across the flats, a second shadow breaks cover, long-legged, all hunger and experience. The teeth in that skull are the opposite of poetry, built to punch through certainty and drink what falls out. It reads the ground for mistakes, the calf drifting a half step too far from its mother's hip, the bull with a limp and too much pride. Triceratops reads it back. The herd tightens. The big one steps forward and lowers its head, frill squared, horns making a V that isn't an invitation so much as a promise. Somewhere inside that skull an algorithm runs. Angle of approach, length of stride, how far to pivot before muscle, bone, tendon align into a lance. Contact is ugly and fast. The predator darts, trying to make the heavy thing turn into slow, and the heavy thing obliges, only it turns into weapon. The forequarters dip, the hindquarters drive, the neck's fused spool locks the skull into a battering ram. A horn tracks the predator's chest the way a compass tracks north. A small correction, then the world narrows. A sideways hook that aims not for the ribs you see, but the heart you don't. Even a near miss is a lesson. Hide splits, breath leaves in a grunted oath. The attacker clips the frill with those banana-thick teeth and leaves crescents, scars for later, evidence that both sides meant it. The smell that blooms is copper and temper. If you peel that frill open in a museum, you'll find a war diary. Punctures healed smooth on the margins, grooves that match horn tips like puzzle pieces, bone thickened in ridges where life patched life. Most are suspiciously horn-shaped, delivered by someone wearing your face. Intraspecific combat, the notes say. Politest phrase imaginable for, I'm going to try to pry your future off your shoulders. But the predator's signature appears too. Deep oval tooth pits around the edges, the kind of experimental bites you risk when you've decided you're brave today. Some heal, some don't. The stone remembers without commentary. And then there are the low ones. You don't see them until they're almost under you, because that's exactly where they want to be. Flattened to the ground like a rumour trying not to be overheard, all girders and gravel. The top of them a map of knotted stone. Bony tiles, osteoderms, slot across the back like cobbles braced with keratin. The hips wear bossed shields. The skull is a boulder with the eyes. The mouth is small, teeth like leaf scissors, but the jaw works like a lawnmower with opinions. Ankylosaurus does not run. It refuses to fall. Look at the tail. No, really look. The last dozen vertebrae aren't individual anymore. They've been mortgaged into a single beam, tendons laminated into rebar, and at the end a two-sledge head of ossified doom waits where a polite reptile would have a taper. The handle is long, the knob heavy, and between them a hinge of muscle you could build a job site around. Biomechanics types run the numbers and smile in ways you don't want to see. You don't have to imagine the test. Something steps in wrong and the club arcs up from the dust with the suddenness of a trapdoor. Meeting it is not an experience. It's an accident report. Shins are particularly vulnerable because legs are honest. Bones crack. Plans change. Everything about the layout says deny access. Eyes are set low and lateral so the animal reads a wide world. Nostrils open into a sinus maze, a coiled hallway that probably conditioned air like an industrial VC, and maybe helped it cheat desert days. The undercarriage is the soft confession, but getting there requires a lever large enough to flip a patio. Good luck with that when the target is wider than your confidence and rides the ground like a magnet. So picture the dance when hunger meets armour. The big predator does its calculus. Attack from behind, angle for the thighs, force a stumble, and the low thing adjusts with the implacability of bedrock. A turn, a set, the tail floats up an inch, as if remembering it's attached to a spinal cord, and then it blurs. The sound, if you're close enough, is a green stick breaking inside a wet sack. Dust jumps off the predator's shin. Balance leaves the conversation. If the attacker is still brave, it goes in high, aiming for the neck where plate's thin and skin has to move. Teeth scrape keratin. Sparks don't fly, but it feels like they should. It doesn't always go one way. There are ankylosaur armor tiles with gouges scalloped out by teeth that did not accept no as an answer. There are tail clubs with damaged knobs, as if someone blocked one swing with something unwise and the club paid for the education. There are theropod bones with pathologies hard to explain unless a blunt object with an agenda made contact at an inconvenient speed. No courtroom, no verdict, just a recurring pattern. Thick armor heals, heavy clubs crack, predators limp away and try again on a day with better angles. Back at the meadow's edge, the duel with the horns has edged into religion. The predator would like the Triceratops to make a mistake with its feet. The Triceratops would like the predator to make a mistake with its life. The bull doesn't charge head-on unless it's cornered or furious. It waits to pivot into a strike that lifts. The brow horns aren't short daggers. They're long enough to reach organs through opportunity. There's a moment when the attacker lunges for the hamstrings and the horn arrives like a counter-argument risen from the earth. The predator twists, catches the strike along its ribs instead of into them, and fate downgrades puncture to furrow. The price is still paid. Blood, a stride that no longer matches the blueprint, a promise that next time will be smarter. Close your eyes and read the rest with your ears. The Ankylosaurus drags a low, armoured whisper through scrub. The pitted tiles click with each breath. The Triceratops snorts steam into air that doesn't deserve it, pours dirt that's seen this show 100 times. Insects back off. Birds lift. The predator stalks parallel, now outside horn reach, tongue sampling iron in the wind. Somewhere back behind all this theatrics, the herd keeps moving, because safety is a curve drawn with many bodies, not a duel one by one. They were not pacifists, these so-called prey. They were engineers. The Ankylosaurus's spine reads like a manual on how to turn force sideways and give it back with interest. The Triceratops' skull is a philosophy dissertation on leverage and centre of mass. You can map their intentions in scars. Ankylosaur hips show remodelled bone where something heavy torqued the tail over and over for years. Triceratops frills carry healed punctures the diameter of a rival's horn, sometimes clean through the bone, a literal "I see you" written in tissue that refused to quit. Each healed mark is a note to predators. This is not a soft job. You may clock in, you might not clock out. Night brings another layer of bad humour. Water gathers in low spots, turning dust to glue. The Ankylosaur takes to the shallows and becomes a boulder with opinions and a periscope. The club floats just under the surface, patient as a rumour. A hunting shadow tries the old back door, wading to get at the belly that evolution placed inconveniently near the ground. The swing is slower in water, true. It is also heavier. The splash is obscene. Something screams in a voice that came up from the hip. The river forgets itself and goes red around the edges. Dawn finds the meadow full of receipts. The predator limps but lives, teeth still sharp, pride repurposed into rage to spend on smaller problems. The Triceratops bull bleeds in places it can afford, breathes like a forge, and walks to rejoin a herd that will not ask questions. The Ankylosaur stands up like a hill, putting on legs, and shuffles out to the sun, tiles warming, nasal labyrinth condensing breath into little clouds. None of them won, none of them lost. All of them survived another negotiation conducted in the only grammar the late Cretaceous believed in. Mass, structure, will. And if you follow their bones into museums and pull them close, you can hear the after echo. Triceratops horn cores polished along one side, where keratin once slid against keratin in a long shoving match that neither lover nor lawyer could define. Ankylosaur tail vertebrae fused into a single sermon about what happens when you commit. Predator teeth with enamel spalled where they bit down on answers that were harder than the question. We call one prey and one predator because our labels are lazy. Out here, those roles are only ever temporary. The real distinction is simpler. Who understood their own weapon better, and who forgot for a heartbeat that the other side had one too. The dead leave paperwork. Not on paper, on bone, in scars inside stones that used to be stomachs and in turds that fossilized into angry geology. You don't need a monster to tell you a horror story when the rocks are already gossiping under oath. Open a field kit and a skull in the same afternoon and you'll hear it. The Mesozoic was a series of crime scenes politely archived by time. Start with teeth on bone because that's the ink most killers preferred. There are only so many ways a mouth can hurt you, and each one leaves a different autograph. A perpendicular chomp that stops short makes a pit. Drive through and you've made a puncture. Drag the tooth along while the neck pulls and the body weight livers. That's a score, long and mean. If the bite skates, then re-engages. Skip marks, a dashed line like Morse code spelled in pain. Under a hand lens, serrations write microscopic ladder rungs called dentical striae that carry the spacing of the murderer's tooth right into the victim's cortex. Measure those striae, how far apart, how deep, how square, and you can point to a jaw in a tray and say you were there. Big tyrants leave big punctuation. Find an oval pit the size of a coin in a hadrosaur vertebra, crushed margins powdered into a chalky grin, and you're reading the minutes from a meeting between bone and a round cross-section tooth that did not come to negotiate. Some of those holes heal, bone rings raised and remodeled, the body's grudging apology for living through the ambush. Others don't, because the meeting had an agenda. Either way, the spacing often matches tyrant dentitions like keys slotting into locks, and sometimes a tooth breaks off and stays behind. Foreign enamel entombed in living bone until the living stops. Nothing says this was not just scavenging old soup bones, like a healed vertebra hugging the tip of a predator's tooth, like a souvenir. Slices sign differently. Allosaurids and Carcharodontosaurids wear blades where tyrants wear chisels. Their autographs are parallel furrows and bevel-edged scores at tendon origins, the mechanical weak points. On sauropod ribs you'll see paired saw tracks that overlap like a butcher's long pull. On a pelvis, tidy rakes where hamstrings once anchored. Each stroke a plan to unfasten locomotion from the skeleton. Every groove is a sentence about aim. Every superimposed groove is the editor insisting on a rewrite. Sometimes the victim hits back and logs a counterclaim. A stegosaur spike plugs an allosaur hip clean through. A horn goes through a frill and comes out the other side, heals over in a grotesque knothole that proves the owner carried the insult for years. Ankylosaur clubs don't write, they erase. What you find are theropod shin bones with pathologies that read like a physician's shrug. Something heavy hit this fast. Not all bone stories are neatly labelled. Some are just a limp fossilised into architecture. The ground keeps books too. A kill site is messy in predictable ways. Concentrated shed teeth, the disposable scalpel blades of a lifetime, piled near large limb bones and pelvises where meat clings longest. Fragments of ribs trampled into confetti. A statistical bias toward juvenile prey because the world is cruel and the young are easier to argue with. A flood can move the whole mess and lie about it, rounding edges, sorting bones by density, rolling skulls far and leaving hips behind. That's why taphonomists, grim accountants with sunburn, learn to read abrasion like a language and distinguish trampling scratches, shallow, V-shaped, chaotic, from feeding scores, deeper, organised, paired, persuasive. Open your hands and catch the most undignified treasure of all, coprolites. Yes, fossilised feces. the past's rudest diary. Slice one and you might get a snowstorm of bone chips suspended in rock, proof of bone crunch feeding, the digestive tract acting like a cement mixer with opinions. In some, fish scales glitter like armour in a bar fight. Phosphate preserves detail. CT scans show hairline arrangements of shards that used to be tibias and carpals and unwise choices. Chemical ghosts cling to. Phytoliths from plants in herbivore dung. Collagen fragments torn down to memory. Rare biomarkers that whisper fish, or fern, or something that panicked. If you're tired of poop, you're not. Try stomachs. Some fossils die fast enough to keep lunch in place. Pull the ribcage window up, and there it is, a pile of last decisions. Fish scales stacked like roof tiles in a long-snouted predator's gut. River work documented beyond reasonable doubt. A juvenile herbivore's bones curled where a slicer didn't bother to be delicate. Tiny lizards and mammals in the bellies of little bird-boned hunters. A tapas menu of hubris. Herbivores play too. Gastroliths, smooth polished stones, clustered in the belly, a rock tumbler that helped grind plants into compliance. Sometimes the last meal is weirdly specific, a low-armoured herbivore full of ferns and a sprinkle of charcoal, a snapshot of a landscape that burned the week before the eater did. The intestines don't write poetry, but they leave receipts. Forensic splits hairs finer than any feather. Tooth microwear, the pattern of pits and scratches on enamel, maps what an animal did with its face in the last days of its life. Coarse pits and spalled enamel, too much bone, stop doing that or buy new teeth. Fine parallel scratches, a slicer's steady diet of meat, tendons, ligaments. A different microscope and you're looking at isotopes. Oxygen dancing to the tune of water and weather. Carbon telling you which plant started the food chain. Nitrogen whispering where an animal sat on the ladder of who ate whom. Trace elements in bone can betray a lifetime spent near the sea or far upriver. Rare earths wash in during burial and fingerprint the cemetery. Even skin and colour stage an occasional resurrection. Under a scanning electron microscope, pigment packets, melanosomes sometimes fossilise. Tiny beans and sausages carrying echoes of dark bands and rusty backs. Not blue like the sky or chartreuse like a bad decision, because bright pigments don't fossilise well, but enough to tell you the hunter wasn't beige by default. Patterns matter. Stripes and banding read like camouflage for the hours predators prefer. Countershading is physics in fur and feather and scale, bending light to make shape disappear. The crime scene extends to the wardrobe. Pathology, the body's history of bad choices, adds margin notes. Healed face bites onto tyrants, social arguments settled with dental memos, infection pits around old wounds. A jaw that kept eating even when the tooth was a problem. Vertebrae fused by stress. Tails that whipped too many times in anger or love or balance. Rib calluses by the dozen. Everyone misplaces a foot near a sprinting meal eventually. These are not the marks of monsters. They're OSHA violations in a world without inspectors. Sometimes the rocks themselves stage the murder. Predator traps are honest. A mud pit that smells like dinner. A pool that is easy to enter and difficult to exit. An ancient sinkhole with a genius for bait. Carnivores arrive drawn by rot and leave as stratigraphy. Elsewhere, drought shrinks water into geometry and concentrates every mouth into tight radii where patience and insolence collide. Mass death layers stack bodies that never knew one another. Later scavengers remix them into lies that look like communities. The forensic job is to unmix, to decide whether the crowd died together, doing something brave or separately doing something hungry. And then there are the famous controversies, the ones that remind you science is a professionalised way of changing your mind. A jumble of small-bodied predators with little cousins mixed in looks, from a distance like cannibalism. Add croc kin misidentified as juveniles and the accusation loses weight. Move continents to a place where bite marks match grown-ups on grown-ups, and you're back to they ate each other when it made sense. The bones don't stand in the witness box. They just sit there being compelling, and we revise the transcript until the story fits all the grooves and none of our vanity. Footprints and trackways are the neatest notes in the archive, a choreography that survived the weather. Parallel prints, 3 or 4 moving in the same direction, not proof of tactics but evidence of tolerance. A day when it paid to be pointed at the same horizon. A skitter of small prints inside the big ones, hatchling stepping where adults did, because safety scales. Deep divots with drag lines and a swirl of tailmark, a takedown in mulch, physics etched like a slow-motion replay. Some tracks end at nothing, because the wind took the ridge. Others end in chaos, because something with claws rewrote the plan. Soft tissue finds are the universe winking. Skin impressions, pebbled mosaics and hexagonal tiles that say armoured or sleek. Keratin sheaths on horns that turn polite bone stubs into weapons much longer in life. Tendon imprints along tail vertebrae like the railroad ties of a whip that never learned forgiveness. Occasionally the outline of guts, a desiccated silhouette of plumbing that once moved heat and hunger around. They feel like contraband, illicit glimpses you're not supposed to have, the kind that make museums lower lights and people lower voices. If you want to feel the past under your thumb, try the bone weathering scale, sun-cracked patinas that creep from stage 0, fresh enough to be indecent, to stage 5 crumbled into philosophical powder. A skeleton dried on the surface writes crocodile sun hieroglyphs across itself. Buried fast, it stays smooth and smug until chemistry comes for it. Roots etched lazy lightning across long bones. Beetle larvae bore motives into cortical galleries. Groundwater paints, iron red and manganese black like bruises arriving late. When the murder is over, the cleanup crew makes sure the story doesn't stay simple. Dermestid beetles nibble soft tissue to lace. Insects leave bite widths you can measure and match. Scavenger teeth, mammals later, crocs earlier, overlay predator signatures with their own busy marginalia. A bone that rolled in a river rounds its edges and lies about where it lived before it drowned. A skull transported mouth first collects sand inside what used to plan bites. A pelvis spun in a current loses the delicate processes that made walking work. Tophonymy is transliteration. Take a tangled script and write it in a language somebody can speak without lying. Laboratories turn the volume up even more. High-energy scans light bones from the inside, unveiling hidden fractures, bite channels, and the spiraled microcracks of green bone breakage that only happen in fresh kills. Thin sections under polarized light show seasonal growth arrested by famine resumed after rain, ring like tree trunks with a terror between winters. Enamel chemistry maps a life's wanderings from one watershed to another. The bone chemistry tells a shorter story, a last address. Glue together enough of these and a skeleton becomes a timeline. Add a coprolite and you get a punchline. Not every mark is violent. Some are about hunger with good manners. Herbivores leave grinding plates on the teeth that wear like topographic maps of their diet. Coarse silica from horsetails, softer ferns when fires passed through and made new growth sweet. Conifers in the shoulder seasons. Chewed wood shows up where it shouldn't, telling you drought taught animals to eat furniture. Pollen in dung lanes up with seasons like a calendar. The lived world squeezes into the bones of those who eat it. The dead world squeezes back. Every so often the evidence rises to theatre. A mummified herbivore displays skin draped over ribs, the integument a petrified tarp. In the stomach a selection of plants clip crushingly close, the last lunch clean enough to plate. In a butcher's case elsewhere, a long-snouted predator died bolting a fish almost as long as its arm. The fish skeleton lies curled in the chest, perfect, accusatory. A last laugh that took 120 million years to deliver. A small predatory dinosaur curls with its head tucked under its forelimb, asleep forever, because volcanoes do not respect bedtime. These are not just facts, they're tone. It's tempting, surrounded by all this evidence, to turn every bone into a confession and every scratch into intent. Forensics argues back. A healed bite mark proves only that something tried and failed. An unhealed one proves the animal was fresh when chewed, not that teeth delivered death. A cluster of shed teeth means feeding, but not who killed whom. A bone bed means a lot of dead things in one place, not a moral. The story is there, abundantly there, but it insists on being told with humility. The rock will correct you if you posture. Still, if you want the short, impolite summary written in scars and scat, the Mesozoic processed life with engines made of appetite. Jaws left autographs, guts kept diaries, bones recorded meetings with weather and physics and choices. Nothing is abstract when a serration groove aligns with a tooth on your tray, or when the last meal stares back at you from inside a ribcage you just opened. We call them monsters because that's fun. The evidence says they were professionals, and professionals always leave clean paperwork.